Hi everyone. So one of the things that defines historical European martial arts is the study of sources. So most of the systems that we study don't have any living lineages. Now I should just add something in there at the beginning to say that there are living lineages of martial arts in Europe. There's Jogo de Pau and there's various other systems of weapon use, maybe Lacan stick use, Savat. These sort of martial arts, usually civilian use of stick or kicking and punching. Of course, boxing and wrestling are both, you could argue, forms of martial art. And of course, there's modern fencing, which traces its lineage back, and so on. So the term martial arts, and I'll probably talk about that in a different video, is a fairly loose one and could encapsulate combat sports as well as what are literally martial arts, martial art being something for war, of course. So there are living lineages of martial art in Europe. However, what we mostly talk about on these videos and what gets the most exposure in the HEMA community is the study of things like, you know, long swords and rapiers and sabres and messers and sword and buckler and so on. And these are old systems that essentially died out, largely. The exception being more recent military systems of use of sabre, bayonet and lance and so on. But by and large, we're studying old sources and we're studying from books. Now, one of the advantages of this, of course, is we are going directly to the source, as it were, written at the time that these weapons were used in life or death struggles, in war or in civilian self-defense, and we're looking at the advice and the techniques written down by people who knew what they were talking about, hopefully. The disadvantage, of course, is that you can only put a certain amount of information into books. It's more difficult, it's slower learning from books. It's easier if you have an experienced teacher to learn from firsthand. In HEMA, we've built up a corpus of experience of people who've been studying and reviving these martial arts from books over the last 10 or 20 years. And now those people are experienced enough to be able to teach people firsthand, such that those people themselves, many of my students for example, don't themselves have to go and study the books, although I recommend them to, and I think it's a good idea if people get close to the sources, but they don't have to. If they just want to come along to my classes or someone else's classes who's been doing this for a while, then they can, you know, learn directly from the person. Now, yeah, there is a perception that Asian martial arts are pretty much entirely taught in lineages, in living lineages, and from master to student, and so on. However, that's not entirely the case, or to put it another way, there are books and treatises, manuscripts from Asian martial arts, okay? And this is something which seems to get overlooked or ignored, or maybe just people just don't know. So for example, there are in Japan texts written about swordsmanship and other forms of martial art, and there are in China apparently, and other parts of Asia as well. And I suspect as time goes by and people start delving into archives and museum collections more in depth, they will find more and more of these treatises or manuals like we have in Europe from Asia. And that will be a very interesting thing, I think, because it will make people perhaps look at the living lineages with fresh eyes and with a different light. Because let's face it, if you only receive your teaching from your master and then you teach the same thing to your student, but there will be slight differences, of course, because you will probably do things a bit differently, and then they will do the same and they will do the same. To use a common expression, it's a bit like Chinese whispers. So the word that you get at the end after 200 or 300 years might be very different to the word that started at the beginning. And that's why I find it very interesting that there are Asian treatises of martial art, because it will enable us to then look at what's being taught today and look at what was being taught in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries and see really how much things have changed, if at all. And I think that's a very interesting thing. And not to undermine the living lineages or you know, belittle them at all, because you gain an awful lot of information from that master-student relationship or teacher-student relationship that you don't get from books. But books are a time capsule for a period of history. And as a historian and archaeologist by training, I find that fascinating because rather than simply blindly trusting what your teacher tells you, you can actually go to the 17th or 16th or 15th century manual and see what the people said back then and see if they agree, see if the techniques are slightly different, and if they're slightly different, why are they slightly different? We know from European martial arts that techniques change over time because of different social environment, different contexts that the martial arts are supposed to be used in, and of course changes in weapons as well. And so just to finish off, I want to show you an example. I believe this is still available on Amazon. I bought it through Amazon myself, and it's called the Comprehensive Illustrated Manual of Martial Arts of Ancient Korea. So here we have a 17th century, I believe, manual. In actual fact, I would call it a treatise, although they are commonly called manuals on the internet. It is a treatise on the use of various weapons in Korea in the 17th century. And there we've got little pictures of figures, and then we've got translation of the text. I personally don't know how closely translated the text is. Here we've got some more figures there, little people with swords, two-handed swords. They look a bit like katanas, but the Korean version, it's kind of like a cross between a katana and Chinese Dao. And then as we go through, we've got various symbolic forms of movements, flourishes with the weapon and so on. Flourish is a European term we would use for it. There's a picture talking about the parts of the weapon there, very interesting. And then more movements with the sword. A lot of these are solo, what you would call in Asian martial arts perhaps kata or kata, or patterns, forms, so on. But then there are partner drills as well, which look more like kenjutsu. And it's very interesting to note that a lot of the positions they hold the swords in, and this is a 17th century original source, or a facsimile of one, are very similar to what's shown in kenjutsu today, but also, interestingly, similar to what's shown in longsword. So if we just look at this picture there, we've got someone in something similar to ox or posta di finestra, and there we've got someone in something like posta breve or langot or long point, something like that. And various different positions, and then you go through to different weapons, and here we've got the sort of halberd or glaive type weapon that you see used in China at the same time as well, and so on. So there we go, just to say that there are Asian combat treatises from historical periods, and I suspect and I hope that as time goes by people will discover more of these and publish more of these, because I think they're a fantastic snapshot of history and can hopefully teach us a lot about the martial arts of those times in other places around the world. Thank you.